It wasn't even a loud cough. It's just a dry little rasp in my throat. The kind that sneaks up on you when the air is too still, too quiet. We were halfway through the second hymn, the part where everyone gets contemplative. The organ hummed. Beneath the verses, low and steady like a sleeping breath. I'd barely cleared my throat, covered my mouth, and looked down at the pew in front of me. But it was enough for her to turn, toss her hair behind one shoulder, and murmur, too. Her friend with a smirk that curled around each syllable like ribbon around a knife. She's being too dramatic again. The word again settled between my ribs like dust. I didn't look at her. I didn't move. Just pressed my palm gently against the side of my neck and kept my eyes on the stained glass window. The one with the lamb and the crown forever caught mid-step. The laugh that followed was soft, but not soft enough. I heard it. So did the woman in the pew ahead of us, whose shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. That was all it took to turn. A cough into a spectacle. That and the way Emily always knew how to thread something cruel into silk. After the service, I waited until most of the congregation had left before I stood. I didn't want the questions, didn't want to hear someone say, "You all right, sweetheart?" As if I were fragile. I wasn't. I was tired. That kind of tired you don't sleep off, the kind that builds quietly. Layer over layer until even your bones feel cluttered. Emily didn't say anything else. She walked ahead, her heels clicking like punctuation, laughing again, this time at something her friend said about parking tickets. I followed, steady, unhurried, carrying the hymn book like a shield. We didn't speak in the car. Michael had taken his own. I sat behind them during the service, which meant I watched the back of Emily's neck the whole time. Watched her braid dip slightly to the left when she tilted her head. Watched her whisper without whispering. It always struck me how little effort she put into masking contempt, as though she believed her smile was enough to erase everything else. Maybe it worked on others. Maybe that was part of the charm. The way she could soften anything, even insult, into something that looked like wit. By the time I got home, the light was shifting, that pale, light afternoon wash that makes everything look a little more tired than it is. I slipped off my shoes by the door, not because I had to, but because it felt like a ritual. Something gentle to undo the sharpness of earlier. The house was silent, save for the soft whir of the fridge, and the occasional creak of settling wood. I moved through the hallway slowly, not in sadness, just in thought. Just in the kind of quiet that lets your mind replay what you didn't say. I passed the piano without meaning to stop. But I did. The box was still there, white with gold trimming, unopened. It was her wedding gift. I hadn't wrapped it. I'd planned to, of course. But then the days had folded into each other, and somehow it had sat there, untouched, like a forgotten intention. It had felt too formal, too final. And maybe, if I'm honest, I hadn't wanted to give it at all. I'd bought it out of obligation, a vintage metronome, hand-polished brass, something elegant for someone who prized aesthetics over sentiment. But now, it just sat there, collecting a thin layer of dust beneath the lid of my silence. I stared at it for a while, not really seeing it. My eyes wandered to the faint smudge on the piano bench, to the chipped edge of the windowsill, to the thin crack in the ceiling paint that had formed over winter. All the things I meant to fix, all the things that waited. I thought of Emily's laugh, the way it wasn't aimed at anything but still managed to land. I thought of how light her voice was when she said it and how heavy it made me feel. Afterward, I didn't cry. I don't cry much anymore. It's not pride, it's preservation. You learn over time that some things are best absorbed rather than expelled. Like sound in thick curtains, like grief in the body. That evening, I brewed tea but didn't drink it. I let it go cold on the table while I watched the sky darken inch by inch. And when Michael called to ask if I'd seen his keys, I said yes. They were in the drawer by the fridge. He didn't ask how church was. I didn't offer. It was just a cough. But somehow that small invisible sound had echoed louder than the entire hymn behind it. I remember the way her suitcase bumped against the hallway walls, apologetically loud, despite her soft steps. Emily had packed as if she were staying forever. 2 bags both overfilled, shoes in separate dust covers. A silk robe folded with the precision of someone who wanted you to notice her good taste without her saying it out loud. Michael carried most of it. He looked proud that day, shoulders pulled back like a boy who'd just built something with his bare hands. She touched his arm more than once, as if reassuring herself of her place. I stood back and watched. The kitchen smelled like lemons. I'd brewed tea the way I always had. Peel and cloves simmered gently, soft steam curling through the window. Lace. When I offered her a cup, she smiled too wide and said, "It smells ... old-fashioned." I remember the pause after, just long enough for her to act like she hadn't meant it that way. Michael chuckled and said that's what made it special. But something in her eyes stayed alert, like a cat watching a bird cage. I nodded, poured the tea, and moved on. She complimented everything: the cushions, the garden, the worn wooden banister. Each praise came with a flick of her eyes, like she was collecting data, placing invisible flags on a map. I told myself she was just nervous. She had a way of wrapping her discomfort in politeness, and Michael, bless him, took every word as sincerity. He watched her like she was made of some finer material. He always had a soft spot for women who seemed a little fragile, the kind who tilted their head when they asked a question, who folded their hands carefully in their lap. That first evening, I made lentil stew. It was raining, just a light tapping on the roof, steady and familiar. Emily offered to help, but not before asking what kind of oil I used. When I said sunflower, she blinked once, slow, then smiled and said, "Interesting." I think she believed herself subtle. Michael didn't notice. He stood in the doorway telling us about the awful traffic and the new project he was working on. I stirred the pot, added a bit more salt, and wondered if interesting would be her way of keeping things at arm's length. That night, after they'd gone to the guest room, I washed the dishes by hand. I liked the quiet of it, the rhythm, the heat of the water. I could still smell her perfume in the air, something faintly floral but sharp, like gardenias with an edge. It lingered longer than I expected. I dried my hands on the old dish towel and turned off the light. Looking back, I don't think it was the compliments that unsettled me. It was the way she looked at the house, not with admiration, but with consideration. Like she was already imagining what she would change. I saw it even then, though I didn't name it. The way she touched the curtain hem, smoothed her palm along the kitchen table, asked how long the piano had been mine. Not rude, just rehearsed. As if she'd memorized a script about how to win a home by charming it gently into surrender. Michael, of course, saw none of this. He only saw the girl who laughed at his jokes, who called him brilliant when he explained the thermostat. His love for her softened everything around her edges, even when they were sharp. I watched them from the kitchen window the next morning. She was standing in the garden, holding a mug I hadn't seen before, her own pale blue with a gold rim. She'd unpacked it already. I smiled politely when she came in. She said the air smelled so clean, almost nostalgic. I didn't ask what she meant. Some things are better left hanging. Like the faint sound of a suitcase zipper opening behind a closed door. Or the first time someone calls your tea. Old-fashioned, not as a joke, not as a compliment, but as a forecast of all the little ways you will soon be replaced. It began quietly, almost politely. A fork missing from the drawer. Not the whole set, just one. The one with the slight bend near the handle, the one I always reached for without thinking. At first I assumed I'd misplaced it. People do that. Kitchens have a way of swallowing things. But then it happened again. A key? The brass one for the side gate. No longer hanging where it always did. I checked the dish rack, the sofa. Cushions, the flower pot by the porch. Nothing. And when I asked Emily, she blinked as if I'd accused her of something unthinkable. Maybe you're tired, she said, tilting her head the way people do when they're pretending to be kind. Maybe it's memory. That word clung to me. Memory, as if it were something slippery and unreliable, as if it were mine to question. I laughed it off that day, but that night I stood in the kitchen with the drawer pulled open and stared at the neat rows of spoons, knives, and the sudden unmistakable gap. It wasn't about the fork. Not really. It was about the pause between what I knew and what she was telling me. The next morning, the kitchen towel was missing, the one with the embroidered edges my sister had sent me from Maine. I found it later, folded in damp in the laundry basket, though I hadn't used it. Emily passed me in the hallway and said something about the weather. Her tone was light. She moved like someone with nothing to hide, but I felt it again. That subtle displacement, that shift in the atmosphere that makes your skin feel slightly too tight. Michael never noticed. Or if he did, he didn't ask. He'd come home late, pour himself a drink, and say Emily had made a nice dinner. He'd ask if I was all right in the way people do when they don't want the real answer. I always said yes. Of course, I'm fine. I smiled too, because if I didn't, it would look like something was wrong. And if something was wrong, it would be me. That's how it works. I started writing things down. Just little notes, dates, times, what was moved. At first, I used the back of an old grocery list. Then a notebook I kept behind the cookbooks. I didn't write much, just facts. 1 measuring cup gone. Returned 2 days later. Michael's. Cufflinks found behind the bread box. 2 batteries missing from the TV remote. Replaced with different ones. I never told anyone. Not even myself, really. Felt silly. Paranoid, but there was something about it all that didn't sit right. Like a draft, you can't find the source of. Emily stayed cheerful through it all. Always polite, always helpful. She asked if I needed anything from the store. Complimented my blouse one morning, the same one she'd once called a little loud. She watered the plants too much. Rearranged the spice rack when I wasn't looking. Said it would be more accessible her way. I told her I'd prefer it left alone. She smiled and said of course, then changed it again the next week. It wasn't just the things that moved. It was the way the house started to feel unfamiliar. Like a hotel room you've stayed in too long. Like the corners had grown softer, less certain. I would walk into a room and pause, trying to remember if the lamp had always been facing that way, if the window latch had always squeaked. I've stopped using the side gate altogether. I started locking my bedroom door. One afternoon, I found my lipstick, the deep berry one I only wore on Sundays, opened, smeared faintly along the cap, then snapped shut as if hurried. It sat perfectly centered on my dresser. Hadn't touched it in weeks. I stood there for a long time, staring. At it, there was no real proof, of course. It's nothing I could say out loud. But it felt deliberate, like a message only I was meant to receive. That night, I added it to the notebook. Just the word lipstick. I wrote it in smaller letters than the rest. I didn't ask questions after that. I watched. I listened. I noticed how Emily would hum. When she was alone in the kitchen, always the same half song. How she would glance at me just a little too long before asking something simple. How Michael's laundry started to come back folded in ways I didn't teach him. How she never offered to do mine. It wasn't about being right anymore. It was about not losing track of myself. Of knowing what was mine and when it left me. There was something blooming, slow and sour in the corners of my home. Not loud, not violent, but real. And I think, in her own way, she wanted me to feel it. Not to break me. Just to make sure I knew it was her house now. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the house hums low with heat and stillness. The guest room window was open, letting in the smell of trimmed grass and something faintly metallic from the neighbor's sprinkler. I wasn't looking for anything urgent, just the stack of church bulletins I kept in the side drawer. The ones with Grandma Nell's handwriting in the margins and small pressed flowers tucked between the pages. I opened the top drawer easily, ran my fingers along the yellowed edges of old birthday cards, and moved to the lower one. It didn't budge. At first, I thought I was pulling it wrong. The wood was old, prone to swelling. But no, it caught too cleanly. Firm resistance, like something had been locked intentionally. I pulled again, harder. It held. The kind of lock you don't see unless you're looking for it. A small shift in control buried beneath the everyday dot Emily had been using the guest room on and off for weeks, ever since Michael's work sent him on that short assignment to Denver. She said the mattress in the main bedroom gave her backaches. He believed her. I stayed quiet. Let her close the door behind her at night. Let her rearrange the linens, her lotions lined up neatly on the side table, her little humidifier glowing, blue in the dark. I didn't ask what she kept in the drawers. They were mine, but somehow they had stopped feeling like they belonged to me. When I asked her about the drawer that evening, she didn't hesitate. "Oh, that thing's always sticky," she said with a laugh that landed just a little too fast. "Must have jammed again." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, but she held it there. Wide, practiced, pleasant. I nodded. Didn't press. Wasn't the kind of lie you challenge out loud. Not when you're already the woman who misplaces her keys, forgets forks, coughs too dramatically. Not when your silence has already become part of the wallpaper. Still. Something in her voice stayed with me. The brightness sharpened into something brittle, like a pane of glass that's been cracked but not yet shattered. She'd lied easily, cleanly, like someone used to being believed. That night I couldn't sleep. The fan buzzed on low, ticking faintly every few turns. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling into itself. Emily's door was closed. A strip of light from her hallway lamp glowed faintly beneath it, unmoving. I closed my eyes, but my thoughts stayed awake, not racing, just circling. That drawer had held pieces of me, the kind of quiet things you don't expect anyone to want. Bulletin clippings, old thank you notes, faded snapshots with names, written in pen along the edges, none of it valuable. Unless you wanted to understand someone, or undo them. I thought about her eyes, how she never blinked when she smiled. I'd noticed it before in passing. At dinner once, when she told Michael I'd insisted on her using the good plates. I hadn't, but she said it so gently, so warmly, that even I questioned myself. Her expression never cracked. No fidgeting, no darting glances. Just smooth certainty. That's the thing about people like her. They decorate their lives with such calm that truth starts to look unruly by comparison. In the morning, the drawer was still locked. I didn't try again. Made my tea, sat by the window, and watched. The birds crowd the feeder like they didn't know the world had shifted slightly overnight. Emily passed behind me on her way to the garden, her sandals soft against the floorboards. She said good morning like it was any other day. I smiled back like it was Dot. But inside, something had changed. Not big, not loud. Just a hinge turning slowly. I no longer believed I was imagining things. I no longer chalked it up to fatigue or forgetfulness. I didn't need proof. I just needed to pay attention. The house was still mine, technically. But the lines had blurred. Rooms had been redefined. And there was something about that drawer, that small sealed silence, that told me this wasn't just about storage or space. It was about territory, whose memories were allowed to take up room, whose past could remain untouched, and whose story, softly and systematically, was being rewritten behind closed wood and quiet locks. The kitchen was always mine. Not in a legal sense, not in any way you could prove or label, but in the way that scent clings to memory. In the way the cutting board wears the same groove from decades of onions. In the way your feet know where to stand while stirring something that needs your whole attention. I had cooked for Michael in that kitchen since he was small, standing on a stool beside me, his fingers dipping into batter before I could stop him. He used to hum when he ate. I hadn't heard that sound in years. It started slowly. A comment over breakfast, Emily saying the eggs were a little oily, though she smiled as she said it. Later, she asked if we could try coconut flour instead of regular. She read somewhere it was better for digestion. I nodded. Why not? Change is healthy, they say. But then came the jars. Tall glass containers with polished wooden lids labeled in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Oat bran, nutritional yeast, flaxseed. They lined up like soldiers on the counter, displacing my chipped. Ceramic canisters. My cinnamon tin ended up in the back of the cupboard behind something called cacao nibs. She bought new utensils, silicone spoons that bent strangely in the heat, knives that didn't quite balance right. My cast iron pan disappeared. When? I asked. She said she thought it looked rusty and moved it to the basement. Michael didn't say much. He'd come home, loosen his tie, and thank her for dinner. Once I made lentils the old way, slow simmered with garlic and turmeric, the way he used to like. He chewed quietly, then said they were a bit salty. Just a little. Nothing to worry about. I smiled and nodded. Later, I poured the rest into a container and labeled it in my own handwriting. Just to feel something of mine still lived in that fridge. Eventually, I stopped cooking when they were home. I started eating later after. The kitchen lights dimmed and the air went still. I'd warm soup in silence, listening to the soft tick of the microwave. I'd sit by the window with my bowl and look out at the yard, where the roses had grown wild this season. They hadn't bloomed right. Too much rain? Maybe. Or maybe they'd just stopped trying. The funny thing is, Emily never said I couldn't. Cook, she offered, often. In her way, asked if I wanted her to pick up anything special, said I could show her that recipe again if I wanted. But her tone always carried that brightness that burns. It's that sweet, cloying suggestion that what I knew was quaint now, outdated, salted too heavily, with habit. Michael seemed tired all the time. I watched him more than I spoke to him. His shoulders rounded when he sat. He nodded more than he answered. He'd watch Emily move around the kitchen like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. Sometimes I wondered if he remembered the mornings we made pancakes together, when he spilled milk and laughed so hard he hiccuped. I never asked. Some memories are safer left in one piece. I kept my spices in a tin box now, tucked in the hallway closet. I still cooked, just smaller things, quieter dishes. Tea brewed in a single cup. Toast with a little butter and sugar, the way my mother used to make when we were children and money was tight. I didn't mind, I told myself. It was easier this way. No clashing, no corrections. But some nights I'd find myself standing in the doorway, just looking in, watching the way Emily stirred things without tasting, the way she kept wiping surfaces even after they were clean. The kitchen gleamed more than it ever had, but it didn't smell like anything anymore. There's a loneliness that comes when your home forgets your hands. When the walls echo someone else's rhythm, I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I simply let go one cabinet at a time. The kitchen had changed, and slowly, quietly, so had I. The box was beautiful. Ivory silk ribbon, thick and clean like something lifted from a bridal magazine. The kind of bow that held no creases, no hesitation. A small embossed card sat on top, pale gold letters pressed into the paper, the edges crisp. It came 2 weeks after the wedding. No knock at the door, just a soft thud on the porch and a courier van disappearing into the afternoon light. I brought it in without much thought, expecting thank you favors or leftover decor. I didn't open it right away. Sat on the piano bench for hours, catching bits of sunlight and dust in turns. I made tea, folded laundry, watered the ferns. The box stayed where it was, too elegant to ignore, too foreign to feel like mine. Late in the afternoon, after the house had settled into its usual hush, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in pale tissue paper, was a set of handcrafted glass tumblers, heavy in the palm. Etched along the rims with a pattern that reminded me of frost, lavish, delicate, unnecessary. There was a folded note, thank you. It read, in handwriting so close to mine, I had to squint. Thank you for the generous gift, it said. It meant so much to us. Love, Michael and Emily. The envelope bore my name in script. Inside the card, above the printed words, was my signature. Or almost. The loops were too neat. The tilt of the Y was wrong. I always made it curl inward, like a fishhook. This one didn't, and the ink wasn't mine. I hadn't written this. I hadn't picked the gift. I hadn't even known a purchase had been made. I stood there for a long time, not angry, not confused, just still, the kind of stillness that felt layered. It's like sediment settling at the bottom of something long stirred. My name, written in someone else's hand, sent off in gratitude for a gift I never gave. The glass glinted softly under the living room lamp. It looked expensive, showy, something meant to impress, not cherish. It wasn't just forgery. It was something deeper, subtler, a quiet rewriting, a removal, a message that I no longer needed to be consulted or even present to play my part. I had become background, a signature, a placeholder, a name to smooth over appearances. The woman who had raised Michael, fed him, folded his clothes, and kissed his skinned knees, now repurposed into stationery. I tried to remember what I had planned to give. I think it was a linen set or maybe the heirloom picture from my mother's cabinet, something practical, something with weight and story. But I never wrapped it. The days before the wedding blurred together in a way I still don't fully understand. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. But perhaps I had already sensed there wouldn't be one. Emily had done this. Not out of malice, she was never overtly cruel, but out of entitlement, that quiet, polished kind. The kind that smiles as it rearranges your memories. I imagined her handwriting the note slowly, her lips pursed in concentration, mimicking the shape of my letters until they passed for real. I wondered if she practiced, wondered if she laughed. Michael hadn't said anything. Maybe he didn't know. Or maybe he did and chose not to notice. That was the part that ached, not the act, but the acceptance of it. How easily I had been absorbed into their narrative. The mother-in-law who sends lavish gifts and signs her name with grace. No questions. No contradictions. Just the smoothness of a story untroubled by truth. That evening, I put the note back in the box. I tied the ribbon again loosely, not out of care, but out of habit. I placed it back on the piano bench and walked into the kitchen, the one I now used only after hours. I boiled water for tea, standing barefoot on the tile. The kettle hissed. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then fell quiet. The glass tumblers stayed untouched. I didn't tell anyone. Not then, not ever, really. There are some betrayals too quiet for confrontation, some moments that don't ask for anger, just recognition. I made a note in my drawer, a small line in my own handwriting. Not a list, not evidence, just a memory kept on purpose. That night, I sat in the guest room for the first time in weeks. The drawer was still locked. I didn't try to open it. Instead, I looked around slowly, letting my eyes trace every object, every shift. I realized I had stopped marking time in days or meals. I was marking it in small absences, things that vanished or changed without being asked. Something had settled inside me, not resentment, not even grief, just clarity. She could mimic my handwriting, but she would never know how I held the pen. The scarf was pale blue, almost silvery in the light, soft enough to suggest intention. Emily had given it to me a month after the engagement, folded neatly in a gift bag with a note that said something vague about elegance and matching the season. I'd thanked her, of course. I always did, but I'd never worn it. Not until that morning, I draped it over my shoulders before heading to church, smoothing it with a kind of care that didn't belong to the fabric itself. It was a small thing, thin, delicate, but as I looked at myself in the mirror, I realized it was the only thing she'd ever given me that came without permission or invitation. A gift wrapped in choreography, a performance stitched into satin. And now it would serve a different purpose. The church was warm with the usual hush that settles before a service. Wooden pews, aging hymnals, the faint smell of dust and waxed floors. I chose the row directly behind Emily and Michael. Not out of pettiness, just practicality. My spot. My view. My history. She didn't turn around. Her hair was pinned high, a single pearl glinting near her left earlobe. She whispered something to her friend just before the choir began. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the smile that followed, soft, closed-lipped, full of knowing. Then a glance over her shoulder. Quick, disinterested. Her eyes slid past me and landed elsewhere. The choir started an old hymn, one I hadn't heard in years. Something about dignity, the kind of dignity that holds without armor, the kind that bows but doesn't break. I closed my eyes for a moment, let the words float past me without catching. When I opened them again, Emily was laughing quietly with her friend. She tilted her head, pointed discreetly in my direction, then leaned in again. I didn't move, didn't blink, just let the silence wrap around me tighter than the scarf ever could. After the service, people filtered out slowly, handshakes, soft chatter, the occasional burst of laughter near the coffee urn. Michael turned to say something to someone, and didn't notice when I walked past them. Emily caught a glimpse of me then. Her smile didn't fade, but it paused. Like a dancer missing a beat. I held her gaze for just a moment. Nothing sharp, nothing theatrical. Just stillness. I didn't go home. Instead, I stepped into the pastor's office, where the light was gentler and the air smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. He looked up from his notes, surprised but warm. I didn't sit. I reached into my bag and pulled out the receipt. The one for the glass tumblers I hadn't purchased, with my forged signature still curled at the bottom. I'd folded it cleanly, pressed it flat beneath a book for a week to keep the edges neat. For the choir, I said, my voice held, steady, quiet, no embellishment. He took it without question. Just nodded and said thank you, his eyes searching mine for something more. I gave him nothing. That was the point. I stepped out into the brightness of the afternoon. The scarf slipped slightly as I walked, and I let it. I didn't adjust it. Let it fall where it wanted. Let the breeze pull at it. Let the gesture remain unfinished. There was something freeing in that. Emily wouldn't notice the receipt was gone. She wouldn't know today was the day I chose not to correct, not to argue, not to explain. She'd return home, unwrap a pastry she hadn't baked, light a candle she didn't need, and move through the house as if the walls had always belonged to her. But the choir would sing with glasses that rang when tapped. Glasses that glinted under sanctuary light. And she'd see them someday on a table or in a cupboard and wonder if they looked familiar. I didn't need her to know what I had done. That wasn't the point. This wasn't revenge. It was return, not of things, but of place. A quiet boundary laid without warning, without noise. Just a receipt, a gesture, a step back into the version of myself that didn't need an audience to stand. The scarf caught on a thorny branch as I passed the rosebush near the sidewalk. I didn't stop to untangle it. I just kept walking. Let the fabric pull. Let it tear if it wanted. Things aren't meant to stay soft forever. She noticed the box on a Thursday. Or rather, noticed that it wasn't where it had always been, perched on the piano bench, half in shadow, gathering dust like something waiting to be dealt with. I'd grown used to its presence, to its quiet accusation. But after that Sunday, I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want what it stood for. The forgery. The softness. The way it pulled my name into something hollow. So I gave it away, quietly, as if clearing a space on a shelf. No anger, no noise, just, "Gone?" Emily asked. "Michael first." I heard her in the hallway, voice lighter than usual, tinged with something too casual to be sincere. She was trying not to sound concerned. He mumbled something I couldn't make out. A pause. Then her steps came down the hall toward the kitchen, where I was folding a dish towel in half for no reason except to keep my hands moving. She stood near the table, not quite close enough to be warm. Said she noticed the wedding gift box was missing. I looked up from the towel, let the silence stretch a little longer than it needed to. Then I told her I donated it for the choir. They needed it more. My voice didn't rise or fall. It came out clean, like something already decided. She blinked. Once, twice. Her mouth opened just slightly, but no words followed. She didn't expect that answer. Maybe she'd hoped for confusion or apology. Maybe she thought I'd pretend it had gone missing, or that I'd lost track of it, like I was supposed to lose track of things now. But I said it plainly, and I meant it. I watched her realize that she didn't argue, just nodded once, stiff, and left the room. The air behind her felt cooler. It's like something had been removed. Not just the box, but something invisible. A hold, perhaps. A script she thought I'd keep reading from, quietly, like I always had. Michael walked in a few minutes later. I was slicing carrots into a bowl, not for anyone, just out of habit. He leaned against the doorway, hands in his pockets, the way he used to when he was unsure but didn't want to show it. Said flatly that Emily mentioned I gave the gift away. I nodded. That's all I did. He sighed. Not deep, not theatrical. Just tired. Then he left the room to Dot, and that was it. No accusations, no questions. No outrage. Just the sound of the fridge humming and the knife continuing its rhythm against the cutting board. It struck me then, quietly but firmly, that she'd never be punished for any of it. Not truly, not by him. There'd be no moment where everything came to light and she'd be held accountable. No dramatic unraveling where the truth surfaced and someone defended me. That wasn't how these things worked. She would continue on, hosting dinners, arranging shelves, signing cards, all with that same easy polish. Katie, and people would smile back at her because she made it easy to believe everything was fine. But she'd know. That was the part I hadn't realized I wanted until I saw her reaction. The quiet shock behind her eyes when she understood I'd done it intentionally. Not in confusion, not in error. But by choice. She would carry that knowing. That someone had drawn a line and hadn't explained why, and I no longer needed to explain myself to people who had already chosen not to see me. There was a freedom in that, kind of lightness that doesn't come from being right, but from being done. I had tried, in so many quiet ways, to be understood, to keep the peace, to adapt. But now, I just wanted space to breathe without permission. I poured the carrots into a container and slid it into the fridge. Closed the door gently. The house didn't feel warmer. It didn't feel resolved, but something inside me had shifted. Just a little. Enough. Weeks passed in small, undramatic ways. The kind of time that doesn't announce itself, just folds gently into the corners of your life until it becomes part of the furniture. I returned to my routines: early mornings with the kettle, late afternoons pulling weeds from the soft dirt of the garden. The roses had started to come back, stubborn and shy. I trimmed them carefully, no longer in a hurry to see them bloom. Emily avoided me now, not openly. She still moved through the house with her usual efficiency, still placed her tea mug precisely on coasters, still hummed under her breath when no one was looking. But she didn't linger in the kitchen when I was there. She didn't ask questions. If our paths crossed, she smiled with a kind of clipped politeness and turned away quickly. The gift box was never mentioned again. The silence between us wasn't cold, just clean. Like a room after it's been aired out. Michael became quieter too. He moved through the house like someone navigating a museum, careful not to touch anything too deeply. I think he sensed it, the shift, even if he didn't understand it. He'd ask how I was doing, and I'd say, fine. He'd nod, then look past me, not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't press. He had made his peace with comfort. Over clarity. That wasn't my burden to carry anymore. The house felt different now. Not better, not worse. Just different. Still, lighter. I started lighting a candle in the mornings, one of the ones I used to keep stored for guests. Cinnamon mostly. The scent settled into the corners of the kitchen and made it feel familiar again. Not mine, exactly. But not foreign either. It's just a space I moved through without apology. I began to hum again while I cooked. Small things, bread pudding, sweet potatoes with clove, tea boiled slowly in a deep pot. I didn't do it for them. I didn't leave notes or call anyone to dinner. I simply made what I felt like making when I felt like making it. If the food was eaten, it was eaten. Not, it waited quietly in the fridge until it wasn't. There were no apologies, no scenes, no reconciliation, just the quiet establishment of distance. A rearrangement of weight. I stopped waiting for acknowledgement. I stopped hoping to be understood. And in that stillness, something opened up, a new kind of breath, a deeper kind of solitude. I didn't reclaim the whole house, just pieces. The garden, the porch steps in the late afternoon, the piano bench, where I read again, slowly, letting chapters drift between cups of tea. I played a little too, though my fingers were out of practice. The chords came back softly, like something remembered more by muscle than mind. Emily's footsteps no longer registered as threat. Michael's sighs no longer felt like disappointments. They had become background, not enemies, not villains, just quieter, less centered. I think that's what peace really is. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to stop orbiting it. I no longer fought for rooms where I wasn't wanted. I didn't hover at the edge of conversations. I didn't re-enter spaces that had been subtly closed to me. And in doing so, I found a kind of freedom that no confrontation could have given me. Not triumph, not justice. Just quiet ownership of my breath, my time, my tone. One morning, I sat in the garden with the sun just breaking over the fence. A robin hopped near the planter box. The soil was warm under my fingernails. Emily passed behind the kitchen window. I didn't look up. I didn't wave. And I didn't need to, because I wasn't waiting for her anymore. Because this new silence, the one I had chosen, not the one forced on me, was finally mine.